Hello again, it's Preheat. Welcome back to another World of Warcraft video, and also happy Thanksgiving. So today I want to talk about something that I've heard a lot of people talking about, and it's something that I've seen a lot of takes and misinformation about. We are going to be discussing Augmentation Evoker damage, specifically when it comes to Warcraft Logs. Because right now, augmentation damage in Warcraft Logs is basically inaccurate. It varies depending on the situation, but it can be anywhere from like partially inaccurate to just completely inaccurate. Okay, and a lot of people are seeing augmentation damage and they're thinking, wow, augmentation is really, really bad. Like this class is just not doing any damage. And I wouldn't blame you for thinking that. I mean, in logs, which is what, we typically trust to have a correct assessment of our performance, augmentation is looking really, really bad. In fact, if you look at the current stack right now for 90th percentile, it's basically down there at the bottom. Okay, so is it because augmentation got nerfed in patch 10.2? In part, yes, of course, there's part of that that's true. But the bigger issue here is not that it was nerfed, it's that you aren't actually getting credit for the damage that you're dealing. So you know what I'm talking about. If you've been running keys with like assassination rogues, BM hunters, you're noticing a lot of your damage just like isn't coming back to you. Now, obviously, this is something that Blizzard is working on. It's not any issue with Warcraft Logs, so don't blame them for this, right? It's just, basically it's just not working the way it should be. And they're working really hard to get this stuff figured out. But in the meantime, just be aware that you can't really trust logs for your damage done. So I'm going to give you a couple examples because there's actually a lot that's wrong. I can't go into every single little detail, but I'm going to give you a list at the end, at least the list of what we know so far. I have to emphasize it's just what we know so far because literally every single day we're finding new abilities that are bugged. And I want to give a special shout out to Zephyrus of the Evoker Discord, who also works for Warcraft Logs, for providing Blizzard with a ton of information about what's bugged. And, he's been honestly an asset to trying to get this stuff fixed. So my aim with this video is I want to inform you about what's bugged so that number one, you know that you don't suck and there is more to the story. And number two, so that maybe we can crowdsource this a little bit to try and get this stuff fixed as soon as possible. Okay, so let's talk about what's bugged. And this is where it gets super weird in some cases. Obviously, there are abilities that just aren't kicking back at all. So the link to this is going to be, by the way, in the description if you want to check it out, because that's going to be more up to date than this video. This is just as of today. But like some abilities like Blade Flurry, Shadow Blades, Soul Reave, Sanguine Blades, Poison Edge, Caustic Splatter, Sudden Demise, those are all like really high abilities, like they're all doing a ton of damage. Those aren't giving back anything at all. That's just Rogue, by the way, just Rogue. But here's a fun one. So BM Hunter, up until recently, wasn't kicking back on Beast Cleave or Kill Command. That was fixed recently. Not totally though, because there are some cases where it isn't kicking back. So for instance, if their Dire Beast does any of those abilities, then it just doesn't work. We don't get anything back from that. But it actually gets weirder than that. So here is a log where a BM Hunter had their pet die. And after their pet died, they resummoned it. And lo and behold, the new summoned pet was not contributing anything back for Ebon Might. So weird trick for Hunter if you want to parse. Just get your pet killed and then resummon it. And then you're not going to give any damage back to the Augmentation Evoker. And basically you can steal all that damage and it's going to inflate your logs, right? Because that's how this works. The damage doesn't just disappear. It goes to the people that are getting your buffs that aren't giving you back the kickbacks from it, right? So here's an example of the pet. And by the way, this is a great way to know if something is at least just working like at a baseline. If you mouse over on the DPS, you should see taken by ability. Just know that this, we've noticed some issues where maybe ability like isn't kicking back enough, but at least this is like a baseline, because if you see an ability missing here that you buffed that person with, then you immediately know, okay, well, there's a problem here, right? So there's the example with the pet that came out later, and then this was it before it died. As you can see, it was contributing before the pet died. Once the pet died and was resummoned, for the rest of the instance, the pet no longer gave kickbacks. Kind of a weird bug, but hopefully this illustrates to you like how strange some of these bugs are, because it's not just as simple as like, oh, well, these abilities just aren't working. It can also be your pet dies and then it doesn't give anything back, right? So again, I'm not going to talk about each and every bug because the latest information can always be found in the link, but just to kind of give you an idea of more bugs, Ebon Might, Shifting Sands, and Prescience do not reattribute anything if the origin damage is fully absorbed. That's obviously an issue on a lot of bosses, especially stuff like Tendril Sage Swift, right? And then, of course, there are other bugs with like Breath of Aeons not extending. Sometimes our Shifting Sands just aren't working as well. That's a new one that's been found recently. That's your mastery. And then when it comes to actually giving the damage back, we already talked about Rogue how Rogue has a ton of abilities, especially like Assassination. Ton of stuff that you're going to be doing a ton of damage with is just not coming back at all. And then obviously we've got, you know, Demon Hunter, Warlock, Shaman, Druid, Monk, Mage, all having abilities that are not giving anything back. And then when it comes to Ebon Might specifically, we've got Fatal Mark for Warrior, we've got Flame Tongue Weapon for Shaman. Hunter has a lot of stuff, right? Dire Beast with Kill Command not working. Kill Command Source to BM Hunter or Survival Hunter is somewhat fine now, but of course with the pet bug, right? That could vary depending on the situation. And then we have other stuff like Death Coil not working for Death Knights when it comes to Ebon Might. Shifting Sands not coming back from Hammer of Wrath. Druid Feral Frenzy apparently is having issues. Prescience is also not working on some classes as well. I mean, you get an idea, right? There's just a lot that's not working, and it might be like a lot of little things and some big things too, but the big picture is just that, like, whenever you look at your actual damage, like when you're looking at how much you did in that fight, you can't really trust what you're seeing because number one, it depends on the classes you're buffing. Number two, it depends on how well they play. But really and truly, like, the bottom line is, since you aren't getting a lot of the damage back, it's going to be really hard for you to assess your own performance. So just to kind of give you an example, and this is purely for educational purposes, of how much damage you're probably missing. You know, and obviously this is just based off of some homebrew stuff, so don't try to sim this out yourself, but like using the item levels in the gear of the people I was buffing on this fight and my current item level, I ran this sim for myself and the other evokers, right? And it said I should be doing about 222k, but look at my actual damage, 178k. Now, there could be a couple things going on here, right? It could be that the logs are bad, probably likely, since we know there's issues with logs. It could also be that maybe there's some issues with simulation craft, which I wouldn't say that that's impossible. There's definitely a chance that's happening. I mean, with little things. But overall, the bigger issue here is logs. Like, we know that. We know that there is information in logs that just isn't carrying over. So how much your actual damage is underperforming compared to logs could vary a lot. It just depends on who you're buffing again. But if you're buffing the good classes, it probably varies quite a bit because the good classes just so happen to be the ones that also seem to have the most issues, like Rogue and Hunter. So do with that information what you will. I'm not recommending that you buff lesser classes to try and like parse better. It's not what I'm saying. I'm just trying to inform you that your damage is much higher than it appears in logs. And also the damage of the people that you're buffing, their damage is also higher than it appears. So yeah, take all that with a grain of salt. Whenever you're in your next key and you're dealing damage and you're looking at your damage after the key is over and you're thinking, wow, you know, why is it that my damage is so bad? Just be aware, like, there's just so much wrong right now when it comes to logs. And there's really no way for you to gauge your performance right now as augmentation other than looking at your buff up times. The best thing to do is just look at your own buffs and just see how much you're buffing other people, right? Like having generally like above 70% of time in the Mythic Plus is usually pretty good for Ebon Might. For Prescience, ideally you have both your DPS pretty much buffed the entire time, but you want to have, especially if you have two-piece, you want to have a couple of those buffs going to your tank or your healer. And then also tracking like when your Breath of Aeons was actually making contact and when it kind of lines up with the rest of your damage healers, right? Because like, for instance, if I Breath of Aeons here, so this is just a random log I pulled up, but if you Breath of Aeons here, as you can see, the damage wasn't quite peaked yet, so you'd probably want to delay it just a little bit to where maybe you can grab the peak over here, or maybe just, you know, just a little ways in, because as you can see, like part of the Breath of Aeons, they got the upward ramp. You want to get it when it's kind of ramped up already. This stuff is hard, right? Like, obviously you have to like have an understanding of logs to be able to like break this down, but I'm just here to tell you that your damage isn't as bad as you think, okay? That if there's anything you take away from this video, it's just that it's not as bad as you think. The damage for augmentation is actually quite good. The issue is it's just not going to show in logs, and because it's being kept by the people who are basically getting your buffs, they're actually overinflated too. So it's like a compounding issue of, well, your damage is lower and also their damage is higher, so it makes you look worse. Blizzard's working really hard to get this stuff fixed, but hopefully this stuff is fixed, especially before next patch. And then we can have a better idea of like how we're doing as augmentation. So anyways, hopefully you learned something in this video. If you find any bugs, like if you're mousing over your abilities and you notice that you aren't getting anything back here from like the taken by ability part right here, if you mouse over it, you see that nothing's coming back. Be sure to report those in the Evoker Discord. Just like put a message in the augmentation channel. Hopefully that gets picked up and hopefully this stuff gets fixed soon. Anyways, If you like this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up. And if you want to see more of my content, be sure to subscribe to the channel, ring that notification bell, and hopefully I see you in the next one.